All right, let's get right into it. What we have here is a real David versus Goliath story playing out in tax court. It's a single taxpayer going head-to-head with the state, and believe me, it has gotten very, very personal.
And this is the number at the center of it all. 6.7 billion rupiah. I mean, just take a second to look at that number. That's the kind of money that changes lives. And it's the exact amount on the tax bill that kicked off this entire legal firestorm. The stakes just don't get much higher than this.
But here's what makes this case so fascinating. The taxpayer actually said this in court. This is no longer about money, it's about humanity. That one sentence tells you everything. For them, this has gone way beyond a financial dispute. It's now a fight for what they see as fairness, principle, and their basic rights.
So the big question is, how on earth did we get to this point, right? How does what should be a routine tax audit explode into a multi-billion rupiah battle that's so emotionally charged? Let's unpack how this whole thing started.
Now, to really get what's going on, you have to hear the taxpayer side of the story first. Their entire legal argument is built on a really simple but powerful idea, that the entire process was broken from the get-go. Let's see exactly what they mean.
In this timeline, this is basically Exhibit A for the taxpayer. The law says the audit had to be finished by February 2024, but they claim the auditors didn't even show up until March 2025. That's a whole year after their legal authority to conduct the audit had supposedly expired. This is the first major problem they're pointing to.
Oh, but it doesn't stop there. The taxpayer laid out a few other major issues. So first, you have that expired authority we just talked about. Second, there's the jurisdiction problem. The taxpayer had moved to Jakarta, so why was the old tax office in Dumai still in charge? And third, and this is a big one, they say they never even received the official documents that started the audit in the first place. For them, any one of these mistakes is enough to say the whole thing should be thrown out.
Okay, that's a pretty strong case from the taxpayer's side. But you know, there are always two sides to every story. So now let's pivot and see how the tax office is firing back. They've got a very specific legal defense for everything they did.
The tax office's entire argument really hinges on this legal idea. They're saying, look, you have to understand there are two different kinds of mistakes. You've got administrative flaws. Think of these as minor hiccups, like a typo or an internal delay. Then you have substantive flaws, and these are the really serious ones that actually violate a taxpayer's core rights. So here's their main point. They're basically admitting, okay, maybe there were some administrative slip-ups, maybe some papers were late, but they are adamant that none of these mistakes were substantive. They argue that at the end of the day, the taxpayer's fundamental rights were never, ever violated. So what are these big fundamental rights they're talking about? Well, according to the tax office, it all boils down to two things. First, the right to know what the auditors found, and second, the right to respond and defend yourself. And they claim they did both of those things, no question. And then they completely flip the script. The tax office turns around and says that while they were doing their job, it was actually the taxpayer who wasn't playing ball. They claim that when they asked for evidence to back up the taxpayer's position, they got nothing, which in their view is what really held up the process.
So this brings us right to the heart of the matter, and it's a classic debate, really. What's more important, sticking to the rules and procedures exactly as they're written, or is it more about protecting a person's fundamental rights, even if the process gets a little messy?
This table really lays out the two completely different philosophies. On one side, you have the taxpayer, who's saying the process is everything. Rules are rules, deadlines are absolute. You mess that up, the whole thing is invalid. On the other side, the tax office is saying, hold on, it's the substance that matters. As long as the taxpayer got a fair chance to respond, little administrative errors shouldn't cancel out a multi-billion rupiah tax bill.
Just when you think you've got a handle on the legal arguments, the plot thickens, because the taxpayer brought up something else in court, evidence of a really bizarre negotiation that they say put them under a ton of psychological pressure. And this is where the story gets really, really weird. Just look at these numbers. The taxpayer gets hit with an initial bill for 6.8 billion rupiah. Then they allege an offer was made to settle the whole thing for just 90 million. I mean, that's a tiny fraction of the original. But when that didn't work out, the final bill comes back at 6.7 billion. Can you imagine that roller coaster? Going from billions down to millions and then right back up to billions again? That's what the taxpayer says made this feel less like a professional audit and more like some kind of backroom deal.
So, after all the arguments from both sides, all the evidence, even recordings of their meetings, it all comes down to the judges. And honestly, they have a massive, incredibly difficult decision to make.
That's right. The fate of this entire 6.7 billion rupiah dispute rests squarely on their shoulders. They have to weigh every single piece of this complicated puzzle. And their decision won't just impact this one person. It's going to send a huge signal about the balance of power between the state and its citizens.
And their choice really boils down to this fundamental question. Do they see the missed deadlines and jurisdiction mix-ups as serious, fundamental violations that make the whole audit void? Or do they see them as minor administrative flaws that didn't really stop the taxpayer from defending themselves? They have to draw a line in the sand between a simple mistake and a true violation of rights.
Ultimately, this whole case pushes us to ask a much bigger question, one that affects all of us. It's about rules, and it's about fairness. So the question I want to leave you with is this. At what exact point does a simple bureaucratic mistake cross the line and become a real injustice?